Okay, we're doing Eros and ED, or erectile dysfunction, and I'm telling the story about when I started getting bald and how I decided at that time that I was just going to be okay with getting bald. So at a certain point, I got in situations when I was, older and on high blood medication and all kinds of other things, and all of a sudden I didn't get erections anymore. And I was faced with the same kind of question. I had the good fortune to have previously decided that aging was just fine and that I would accept myself in the state in which I was in. And so I decided not to be vain about the fact that I wasn't ostensibly virile, or whatever you want to say that word is pronounced, virile. I didn't have virility in the sense of getting erections. And I already had 5 children, and there might be another one or two out there. I don't know, because sometimes women don't tell you about these things. But so it wasn't like I lacked for having, done that part of my life. And I certainly didn't feel psychologically a need, although some men do, you know. But I decided at that time, okay, so I'm going to think about what it means for men to go into a stage of life where they no longer are the same in that dynamic that they went in their youth. And so I thought about it, and I read some things, and I talked indirectly to women friends about it, and I was also at the period of my life which I mentioned a little bit before. I was following some advice which said that I already knew how to be a man, and that relates, of course, to the little bit of dialogue I did previously about the hunger, about this force that's in my soul that wants to make love to a woman, wants to have her, possess her, take her, all those kinds of things, and that I had learned at the same time that I was facing this, shall we say, this loss of function, which the society was describing as a dysfunction. I was also learning that maleness wasn't really related to whether or not that particular thing happened. It had a whole lot of other dimensions, and as a consequence, I look over and watch the clock if you want to know what I'm looking at. So I began to realize that maybe the information that my culture gave me about what it meant to get older and age and no longer have a certain capacity, maybe that information was just basically unwise. And then I got to thinking about what everybody knows about with regards to women. When they age, they go through a process which is called menopause. And their hormonal chemistry changes. And what's the result of that? Well, the result is that they're no longer able to bear children. Okay, and for some women this is a very difficult transition because it has psychological implications as well as physical implications, and depending on the woman and all kinds of other factors, it can be horrific or it can just kind of happen and then it's over. So it occurred to me, well, why doesn't the same thing happen with men? Why doesn't our organism go through a change where it's no longer essential that we have the capacity to make babies? And then as I thought about that, I thought about, well, what does that have to do with being a lover? Does having an erection have anything whatsoever to do with being a lover? And of course, this just didn't all occur to me overnight, I thought about it in all kinds of contexts. And it became clear to me during the process of this reflection that what was emerging there and also in my own intimate life was a blessing. Because with the loss of the erection, there was also another loss, or disappearance, we might say, or transformation, or metamorphosis. Part of not getting erections was also not feeling this drive to have to penetrate a woman and plant my seed. Okay? This is a big deal. Now what happens? What happens psychologically when you don't have when we get into the energy centers, when you don't have this sort of force arising out of the sacral area, the second chakra, that makes you want to plant your seed, that gives you the power of this virility for making babies and all the rest of that. What happens when that's not driving you? Well, what I experienced was that since I was no longer driven, I was open to relating to my lovers in a much more selfless fashion. When I'm driven, when I have this need to finish, to have an orgasm, to put my seed inside a woman, the tendency is to just give in to that and do that, and that's what we call sex. But if I wasn't driven in this way and instead could ask myself, well, what does she want? What does she need? And I'll tell you, the effect of what the culture calls a dysfunction on me psychologically was that I became a much better lover because I could be more selfless. I wasn't driven so strongly to do something to satisfy myself, and I could concentrate and think about in a more clear and loving fashion what it was that gave pleasure to my partner. Now let's face it, okay? I'm going to sort of end with this. I got about a minute and a half here on it. I don't want to do more than just 2 of these things on ED. If we study the polls that are taken of women, we will find ourselves informed that women do not have orgasms through penetration, that is, through stimulation of the vaginal area of their body. They have orgasms through the stimulation of the clitoris, something more on the surface. There's a nerve bundle there. Okay? And, of course, when I talked about earlier in the beginning about women needing to be warmed from within and needing to be desired, these are things that are within the power of the man to manifest out of himself in a selfless way. Now remember that the upper pole of the cross of love is selfless human love, and it's joined to the lower pole where the erotic and sensual arise. Men don't need, when they get mature, to plant their seed anymore. And they can be better lovers because they now think about what they're doing in an entirely different fashion. I don't think anything more needs to be said on that.